leaders, welcome to the Together Project. I'm Kadi Cole, and if you're here, it's because you believe that real leadership means making room for everyone at the table. This season, we are sitting down with church leaders and innovative teams who are doing just that, breaking barriers, challenging assumptions, and shaping a healthier path for men and women to lead in ministry together. So if you're passionate about what it means to lead with authenticity, to make space for different voices, and to create a future where everyone can thrive, then you are in the right place. And if you believe in what we are doing, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the podcast and write a review. Reviews really help the algorithm suggest our podcast to more people. You can also follow me on social media at Kadi Cole, that's spelled Kadicole, and visit kadicole.com to sign up for my monthly newsletter and find all the other resources we have on the topic of developing female leaders. Because as Christians, we know that the future isn't male or female. The future is together. Let's dive in. Today's episode is a powerful conversation with someone I deeply admire. Jack Warren, a longtime friend and executive pastor at Chase Oaks Church in Dallas, Texas. Jack is a champion for female leaders, not just in word, but in action. In fact, I'm currently walking through a leadership healing process with several amazing female leaders from his church. And Jack's commitment to that kind of deep, behind-the-scenes work is what sets him apart as a trusted and intentional leader. In this conversation, Jack opens up about growing up in the Deep South and how that shaped his early views on gender roles. He shares candidly about the dysfunction he witnessed in his home and how it lit a fire in him to pursue dignity, equality, and wholeness for every person in the body of Christ, especially for women who've historically been overlooked. Jack talks about the real challenges leaders face in this area, the intentional systems they are building at Chase Oaks, and why he's willing to be the weird guy on staff if it means more women are invited, empowered, and elevated into their full calling. This is a conversation filled with honesty, humility, and hope. So if you're a pastor or a church leader asking, what can I really do to make a difference? Jack's journey is a model you will want to follow. Jack, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. We've been friends for a long time, but especially the last 5 or 6 years, we've been talking about this issue of women in leadership and how to empower female leaders in the church. So I really appreciate you jumping on the podcast and sharing your story with us today.
Well, I am honored to be here. It's great to reconnect with you, and thank you for your investment in our church. You've been out here to speak to our church. You've helped our church for a lot of years through Leadership Network days, through what you're doing these days, and even what you're doing like right now. You're helping our leaders. So thank you very much, Kadi.
Well, awesome. Thank you. It's a real blessing. I love your church community and I love your group of leaders. So it's a fun team to work with. And you are an excellent leader and a great champion for women. But I know that that's been a bit of a journey for you. So I'd love to catch our audience up to your pathway in becoming an advocate for females in your church leadership space. Talk to us a little bit about the context you grew up in around gender. Where was that? What was your family like? What were the childhood messages you received about men and women?
Yeah, and thank you for, I don't see myself as a champion, like I'm this great champion for women leadership. I definitely believe in it and I want to be a champion, but I don't feel like I've blazed the trail, ready to write a book on it or anything, but I hope some things are helpful. For sure. Mm-hmm. So where I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and in the Southeast, and I lived there for 22 years. I grew up in a home, I kind of describe my home as a blue-collar home in a white-collar world, because I lived in Vestavia Hills, which was a nice suburb south of Birmingham, and yet my dad was a fireman and a house painter, and I grew up painting houses with him from probably 5th or 6th grade on. And so I would go to work with him in the summer, painting houses as a little kid. Everybody else was at the country club or swimming pools during the summer. I have 2 older brothers and a younger sister. We all worked, not my sister, but my brothers worked with him. But my dad had become a Christ follower in his early 30s, and they went all in terms of church world. So we went to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, maybe even Thursday night visitation. Like we were like serious church people. And yet, at the same time, my dad was one of the angriest, most controlling, domineering people that I knew. I didn't know this then. You're just growing up in your home. That's all you know. Yeah. My mom did not work outside of the home, but she killed herself inside of the home, taking care of 4 kids and taking care of my dad. And so she did all of the cooking, all of the cleaning, all the shuttling to sports and various activities. But in terms of their relationship, my dad was a super controlling person, and he was very explosive with anger. And so almost every night I can remember him yelling in the house, and I'd go to the far side of the house just so I didn't have to hear it, sometimes literally put a pillow over my head. And so we grew up in a culture that was very degrading and demeaning in a sense towards my mom and even towards women in terms of the tone that was set with other relatives. And so I think that has led to some of the passion, because I saw my mom, in a sense, lose her soul and her personality very early on, all the way until my dad passed. And that is just painful. And again, I didn't see all of that and have that insight at all when I was growing up in it. But then you get away from it and you realize how dysfunctional something really is. And then you realize how it's impacted you, and you've got to go to counseling and do all kinds of work.
Yeah.
But yes, so there you go. That was the home I grew up in, and it was not a respectful or honoring of women culture. Yeah.
How about the community at large in the South? Did you feel a lot of gender education or kind of like biases or kind of roles that played that were reinforced in the Southern culture?
So again, growing up in it, you don't really see it until you get out of it, and then you see differently. And so when I reflect back, 100% in terms of church culture, just degrading women was just, and again, my dad was a fireman. And so there were no female firemen at the time in the 70s, 80s, 90s, maybe 90s, but not 70s, 80s. And it was just a guy's world, a guy's culture. I think the South still has a lot of that. It's hard. It's literally hard for me to go into the state of Alabama without feeling some of that again. And every time I go visit, I feel some of that stuff, both in the gender world and in the race world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those two often go together in a culture.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, real fast. I do a lot of work in the race world as well because of that. So I've got about as much passion for that related to this women in leadership stuff.
So God has really stirred up just this sense of wanting equality for everyone, valuing every person. That's been a big part of your story.
Yeah, the dignity of every human being, reflecting the image of God, is what is so strong in my soul. Dignity of people is a core value of mine, one of my top 5. And I think it comes from that and seeing it not practiced and not modeled. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, as we go through today, I try to connect gender bias with race bias a lot, because if we can conquer inclusivity of women and their gifts, it makes us a lot better at being able to actually work with real minorities in the church, because women tend to be the majority in most congregations.
Yes.
But, most people of color are minorities in most of the evangelical churches that we would probably be connected with. And so I think there's learnings and practices that impact both when leaders get better at being more inclusive in their leadership. So feel free to educate and share your story on either of those topics as we go. So as you grew up, looked at going to college and choosing a profession, when did you start to realize leadership was, or this idea of females in leadership was a thing, that there was a controversy, or maybe it showed up in your own leadership? When did that start to kind of register for you in church leadership circles?
Yeah, I think it was after I went through seminary. I definitely saw it at seminary. I was at, can we use names of seminaries? Sure we can, right?
Sure.
I was at Dallas Seminary, Dallas Theological Seminary. And it was interesting then because there was a lot of friction and discussion about what programs were open for women. So at the time they had maybe a children's and women's ministry track that a woman could be part of. But when I was there, they had just opened up opportunity for women to be in the THM program. But at the same time, they were not advocates of women being pastors or especially speaking pastors. And so it was this juxtaposition of, wait a minute, so you're going to have, or a contrast of, you're allowing seminary or women to go to seminary, but then you're saying, but you're not really, even though you get this degree, you can't use it in the churches that we would recommend. So that was a big thing in seminary. So that's when it first came on the scene in my mind. And then I was a student pastor for 15 years. And I really saw it there in a positive way because we had some female students who were just incredible leaders. And I was a big fan of putting students in leadership in youth ministry. Went through Sun Life World and all of that training way back in the day. and had a leadership team. And the best leaders were our girls. And they led at high capacity, led up front. They do some teaching. And then I recruited a lot of volunteers and had women as teachers, women as small group leaders. And it's there that I saw, it's like, wait a minute, I'm like creating this environment in student ministry, but our church has not gone there yet. And so I had many interesting conversations with church leadership there. They're like, oh, that's great in youth ministry. But once they're out of youth ministry and they're in adult world, no, they need to kind of be quiet or not use their gifts. They wouldn't say it that strongly, but practically that's kind of how it worked. So
that is one of the confusing things for women who grow up in church, is that especially when they hit student ministries, there's oftentimes a lot of opportunity to lead. There's worship teams and mission trips, and we take over things on Sunday, and you're old enough to teach a Sunday school or be a greeter. And there's a lot of room to lead and a lot of encouragement to lead. But then once you hit that 18-year-old, like, I'm not a kid anymore. Now I'm an adult, and I might be teaching other adults or leading other adults. Suddenly there's like this brick wall that women run into, and there's no longer a growth track. In fact, we have to kind of like hunker down and hold back. And so that is oftentimes a confusing thing for women. And I would say one of the things I see in senior pastors or leaders like yourself who start championing women is their daughters reach an age where they're like, we've been nurturing leadership in this girl for 17 years, and now she wants to do something with it, and we're not sure where to send her and what we can allow that to be. And so that kind of forces the conversation to happen for that very reason.
Absolutely. No, you're spot on. And it's very disillusioning, I think, for some of our women leaders in student world and college world. They do feel like they've been almost fed a lie. Like, hey, you can do this, and you can impact the world, you can change the world, but you can't do it in these roles. But we've set them up to believe that they can. So now I'm in a position where I can. So I love that. That's
right. You can make a difference with it. So in your role now as executive pastor, you're over a lot of ministries, you navigate staff development, you work with a lot of leaders, you coach a lot of the team. What would you say is the biggest lesson you've learned about how leadership can be different for men and women in ministry? What are you learning, or what have you learned about that?
I think this may be what you're asking, and just tell me if it's not. What I see just organically happen is the men in our organization, whatever role they come into, they don't see a ceiling. In fact, they pursue opportunities. They're courageous to say, hey, I've been doing this for 6 months. I'm ready to be lead pastor, or, whatever it might be.
They often do have a lot of ideas for themselves, don't they?
Yes. And what I love is they have vision, and they don't sense this, just do your role. And we try to create a culture, a very open culture that says, what are your development goals? What roles would you like to have? What roles would you like to pursue? And how can we help you get there? We encourage people to apply for other roles within internally and all of that. But what I see is the guys will be eager to do that and almost not quite demand it, but there's an expectation. And for the women, not as much. And if we don't go ask and we don't invite and identify and invite, often they will just stay right where they are, and they'll kill it and crush it where they are, but they're not going to come into your office and say, hey, I'm really interested in this role. Or they won't go to HR and say, I'm going to apply for this. And so for me, I have, and we'll probably talk about this later, but I have to be super intentional of creating a culture where we go to women and say, we want you to. So in terms of how the men and women think here, I think that's still there. And I think I have to be super intentional of creating a culture that is identifying and inviting women into those kind of things.
Yeah, Jack, that's so observant. I think that's a pretty universal thing. The research would back that up, that many women think they're at their lid, or they don't want to look too aggressive by going for something. But in most of our leadership cultures, we're looking for people who are interested in more. We're looking for people who are raising their hand or are hungry for a promotion or for more responsibility. And so women often are overlooked if we're waiting for them to put their name in the hat or be constantly asking for more. They're, on the other hand, waiting to be noticed. They're looking for someone to be like, you actually have talent and ability. I see more in you. I want to invite you into something. And it's not because they lack confidence. They just especially in the church space, I think don't want to appear overly aggressive. And so they
Yes.
tend to hold back a little bit because they know that can be perceived as a really negative aspect of female leadership. And so what you're doing is exactly right. For those of you listening, this is exactly the strategy you have to do. You have to be the one to initiate the conversation. And then oftentimes, women are excited about it. Sometimes you have to convince them or show them why they would be good for this job. But for the most part, it has nothing to do with their ability to perform or their desire to be in the role. It has a lot to do with trying to make sure they don't come across as something that's unattractive in a female leader.
Yeah, no, I see it with, take our campus pastors. We have 5 campuses. Right now, they're all guys. And I will tell you right now, we're launching a campus in a number of months. No female is going to come and say, hey, I'd really like to be considered as the campus pastor. Now, we're going to go and hopefully inspire some people like, hey, consider this. But they're not going to raise their hand because they look at the organization and say, well, there are no women in those roles. So people make assumptions on the decisions that we make and the people we put in those roles. So yeah, we just have to be super intentional about it. And sometimes I feel like I'm seen as the weird guy on staff, honestly, among like even the leadership team. Like, what's up with you and women? Like, why do you, and initially I'm like, well, I'm not weird and I'm not like creeping on them. I just think we have to be intentional, and our organization isn't naturally intentional about that. And so I'm okay with just, if they want to think I'm weird sometimes, that's all right, because I think it's the right thing to do. Yeah.
Well, intentionality is really the key. They're not insurmountable obstacles, but we do have to give some effort to them to overcome sort of the mentality or the assumptions that all of us make from the way we grew up and the spaces that we're coming from and the things we're observing. So one of the things I appreciate about you, Jack, is when we first met probably about 5 or 6 years ago, we had known each other before then, worked on multi-site things, but I was working on this book. And you were really telling me about just God was really challenging you to take a step forward in this topic. You were in a high level of leadership. You're on the executive team. And I just remember you sharing some of the things God was speaking to you and just this desire to make movement, even if you weren't sure what to do. Tell our audience a little bit about that journey. And then what have been some of the intentional steps you've taken to champion women at Chase Oaks?
Yeah, man, I wish I could remember what I told you 5 years ago. I do know one of my goals was to ask you to come speak to all of our leaders, and you did graciously. And that, even in itself, that might seem like, well, yeah, Kadi Cole came up to speak at your church. Of course you got Kadi Cole. She's written all these books and she speaks and does all of this. But there again, I think some of our leaders were still surprised, like, hey, the keynote speaker is a female. And it's like, well, of course, we're going to learn from the best leaders, and Kadi Cole's one of the best leaders. And I'm not saying this just to puff you up. That was one intentional thing of, if we're going to gather our leaders, let's have a female leader come and speak. Because as you said earlier, you've got a higher percentage of women and probably a higher percentage of women leaders in your church than guys. And so that was one small intentional thing, but people still talk about it. And your reputation around here is super strong because of that among all of our leaders. But some other intentional things is I try to challenge our assumptions. I made some notes, challenge our assumptions with roles. I think just since we don't have, for example, I think you know this, but people listening won't. We just recently added a female to our directional team. Now, I know it's smarter to add 2 females to your directional team, but I consider it a small win that we added 1 female to our directional team.
I'll take 1 over none, Jack. I think it's a win.
There you go. And she's phenomenal. She's smarter than the rest of us in the room. And just crushing it in the world that she's leading. And even then, there was some skepticism when she was first coming on the team. And it's like, well, they'll see real quickly how amazing of a leader she is. And they have, and it's been wonderful. But adding a leader to our directional team has been a very intentional thing. But going back further, even just evaluating our systems and our HR systems, our pay structure, our org chart. So looking at our org chart, we did this a number of years ago. Just look at your org chart through that filter. I think it's good to do it through the filter of race, and it's good to do it through the filter of gender, and say
age is the other one. That's a good one.
Thank you. As I get older, I appreciate you mentioning it. But looking at it through the different filters, not just what experience do they have, How long have they been here? Those kind of things. So I think it's important to just say, let's just look at it for this moment through this filter. And things pop out when you do it like that, especially in women in leadership. I've invited women to lead various roles, and this isn't so much a position on the org chart, but some subtle things that I try to do that end up moving the needle is when we have staff gatherings, when we do staff development, various events for our church, positioning women in leadership in those opportunities. It's not their job. They're not taking over staff, whatever it might be. I want women up front, and I want women to lead, and I want them to talk about the hard things, to see that for the organization and people on staff, to see that we have really dynamic, gifted leaders here, and for those women to have the opportunity to lead in those ways. And then that opens up doors. For example, one of our youth staff, super young youth pastor girl, she spoke at her campus just at that one campus. And she sent me her talk. And I don't know if she thought I was going to really watch it, but I watched it and I thought it was phenomenal. And so I went to our lead pastor and said, look, she needs to speak to the whole church. And he's like, are you sure about that? And he's like, yeah, watch her talk, you'll see. And then he invited her. It's a risk there when you're putting such a young speaker up, but she did, and she just did a phenomenal job. And I think she's one of the most gifted communicators that we've ever had walk through Chase Oaks, if not broader than that. Being intentional about giving her the speaking opportunity has led to more opportunities. A few other things.
So good.
Making sure that women are on stage, and we do this with race, but making sure that women are on stage leading in various ways, not just, oh, women can host or women can come do an introduction, but doing a significant part of the service. I think organizationally, as much as I love Chase Oaks, I think I still have unconscious bias. And so I really try to identify those and have hard conversations with our directional team and even our elders about that, and try to push into those things. And then one other intentional thing, if we don't have women who are developed to speak or to lead in certain areas, I'll invite women from outside of our organization to come in and speak and do those things. Because I think it gives a picture for the women on staff of what they could do, but it also sends a message to the guys on staff and people in our church that women are gifted leaders, and maybe we've not done a great job of developing some, but here are some people outside in other cultures, they have been developed, and look at what they're doing. This is what could be here. And so we've done that in a number of ways, doing it right now with a couple of women speakers out of Irresistible Church Network.
Awesome. Jack, those are fantastic ideas. I'm so proud of you all for that, because it really does make a difference to put women up in front. And I think one of the challenges for many leaders, especially in churches, is having women that they feel like they can hand the microphone to or hand the leadership to. So I love that idea of putting people in as many leadership roles as you can. And then if you don't have who you need, bringing them in from the outside so everyone in the culture is seeing it. It's becoming normative to see a woman lead in those ways as you're developing. That's a stopgap. You wouldn't want to stay in the guest only world for very long, but that does help women step into those roles. And like your student pastor, who's delightful, her getting to see some women speak on stage, and for her to watch you as a leader and your whole leadership team listen and follow that gives her a picture of what it would be like for her to do that. And that changes the psyche of someone's calling about what they think is actually possible. So Great work on all of those.
Yeah, it's fun to do it. It's just fun to watch them thrive. Very, very gifted. And it challenges me to get out of the way. Like, I've got an opportunity in my role to create those opportunities, but does that mean I never like to be up front? No, I still enjoy those things, but I find myself in these years saying, how can I get out of the way? Be this younger leaders, women leaders, and support younger women in leadership and younger men, and get them up front and give coaching, provide feedback, and all of that. It's not about me. It's about me developing leaders. And so you got to get out of the way in order to do that.
That's right. Well, and you're hitting on why having a variety of ages on staff is actually so critical, because you work as the body of Christ holistically. And when we have only young leaders or only older leaders, we're missing the development and the feedback that's supposed to happen. And so in our later years, we're supposed to want to step back. We're supposed to want to invest in younger leaders and see the fruit of our ministry through someone else's growth and development. So that's a beautiful picture of what a calling and especially leadership in the church is supposed to look like over a lifetime. That's really wonderful.
Yeah. Can I add one other thing to that?
Please.
In church world, it gets weird. In Dallas, take Dallas, for example, there's a bunch of pastors that have made bad moral decisions and lost their roles in the last 2 years, and they make national attention, and it's a real ugly thing. But one of the ways churches react to that is they're like, oh, okay, we got to be super careful of how our guy pastors interact with our women's staff. And of course, we should all be careful in how we live our lives and that kind of stuff. But we do this gross overreaction, I think, and then we sexualize every relationship. And so, like, for example, I coach a number of women leaders on our staff, and I do it in this office. It's got a glass wall that you can't see here, so people can see in. So we're appropriate in how we do this. But I think church culture, which we probably don't have time to go down this whole world, but I think we put up these walls and almost vilify women because of these decisions that these men are making. And it's not these women's fault. I mean, these men are making these decisions. And I've gone through a whole lawsuit related to a pastor making a bad decision. So I'm familiar with, hey, this is where it can go, and you got to be wise and careful. But we can vilify women so much in our culture because of bad decisions and bad judgment of men. In church world, I think we're some of the worst offenders in terms of sexualizing relationships. And my life is so much better and diverse because of the female friends that I have. And I've got to be wise, careful, use good judgment. But I'll have women friends speak into my life and say things that a guy's never going to say, and I needed to hear it. So my life is much better, and I think the church is much better. But that's a hot button of mine that I could talk about for quite some time. And I think the church just misses out on amazing friendships and relationships that can happen because we sexualize all these male-female relationships. But that's for another day, right?
Yeah, well, you bring up really good points, and I couldn't agree more. We do. And when we overcorrect like that, I think one of the challenges in the church world is that we are so scared of that male-female dynamic and someone stumbling in their sexuality, which is a concern. Like you said, I want professional guidelines. I want wisdom in how we handle that. But men meeting with men one-on-one at a private lunch is actually no longer above reproach. And so the idea that women are the challenge rather than a leader stewarding their own sexuality and purity and leadership as being the main challenge. We're living under a false pretense that not meeting one-on-one with women somehow is the protection we need. We live in a different era, and pastors particularly need to be just as careful in what they're communicating about their relationships with men as they are communicating about their relationships with women.
Wow, you've done some thought on this, and
I have an opinion about this. Yes,
I love it.
So, Jack, as we come to the close here, what are some of the things that God is teaching you now about bias in your own life or in your own leadership, or what are you, as you look forward, are there some things you're excited to tackle or begin working on?
Yeah, I'm going to go personal here if I could, and
Please.
And that is, it has to be hard to talk about. Okay. So my wife passed away like 18 months ago, and she was, in terms of presence on this earth, a very dynamic leader. And she started an organization at TI. She launched a school and grew it rapidly. She taught in high school. She taught in college. She launched a business, developed it, sold it, launched another business, and was just a dynamic leader and a force to be reckoned with in a very positive way. She didn't have this attitude like the world was against her. She just went for it. And part of that is she grew up in a home that just, her dad and mom just said, you're a very gifted person, individual. You can do, neither one of us believe that anybody can do anything they just want to do. But her parents pretty much told her, you can do anything you want to do and you will do it well and exceptionally well, and it will impact the world. And she did. And so part of my passion, and I have two daughters that do some amazing things and hard things in their jobs. And I see how fulfilled all three of them are. Yeah. I'm so sorry.
It's okay, Jack.
I just see how fulfilled Susie was and how she lived. And I wish that for every female who has gifts and strengths. And we just fostered that in our home, and the friends fostered that around them. And so I think what God is teaching me now is I didn't make it a mission just because my wife did that and she's passed away, like, okay, I'm going to take on this women in leadership cause. But it's becoming more of a growing passion. And it's in a way, I can honor her in that way.
That's right.
But we just have so far to go. And so if people like me and the roles that I'm in don't champion it, it won't move. We won't move the needle. And so as far as a church and myself, I have a lot to learn. I think we need to learn by listening so much more. So just taking time to sit and listen with female leaders of what their experience really is like. They'll make you see things that you're doing that you're like, oh Lord, are we really saying that? Oh, that's what you really believe and hear? It's like, okay, well, we need to address that. And so I'm learning to listen more and talk less, learning to sit with the ladies on our staff and get their feedback, learning to pursue blind spots and really seek out the blind spots so that I can determine where is the unconscious bias that's in my own leadership. So I think I'm just learning to aggressively pursue growth in that way and to see those blind spots. See if I had anything else for you. No, I think that's the main thing. It's it's not just a posture. It's a mindset and a heart set and a posture of, I really want to continue to learn and grow and develop. And this is an area that we've got these amazing women around us. And if we're not listening and we're not intentional about it, the world is going to lose out. And I don't want the world to lose out on their leadership, and those women will lose out. And so we've got to be super intentional. So yeah, that's where I'm at today.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, and thank you for being so open about that. I think one of the biggest hurdles to this topic is that it does have to be a personal journey. A lot of what we're talking about takes place in our own heart, our own awareness, our own understanding, our desire to learn and seek out, acknowledging our own biases. And even your wife was amazing. And I actually love that you have renewed passion for this almost in her honor, because I think there are women that we all know, even as a woman, there's my mom and the other women in my life that I want to champion this for, a younger generation of women that are up and coming that I want to have an easier time than maybe I did. And so it does have to have a personal connection to it, to have the energy to overcome some of the challenges that this is, because this is not an easy topic. It's awkward to talk about. It's hard to reflect and do the personal work of it. It's hard to change our own personal behaviors. And it's very humbling to have those conversations and to find out what we're doing that's actually communicating the opposite of what our heart is. But we're all doing it. And that's part of the journey of learning and growing together, is being able to have those conversations and being open to hearing the truth about how we're perceived.
Well, I love the way you do this, because you do it with such grace, and I won't say the word is stealthy, but you're super smart, and you know how people work, and you don't come in just barging in with, you guys need to, but you teach us, you inspire us, you do it through your own leadership. But I think you also need other men to champion this. And you're not just Kadi Cole fired up about women in leadership. You're Kadi Cole who sees amazing leadership that needs to be developed and goes often untapped. And I'm honored to champion that cause and honored to be on that campaign with you. we have more passions and campaigns than just this, but this is one that we're pretty passionate about and will stay passionate about. And I really thank you for guiding the church with your resources, your books, this podcast, and other things that you're doing, and the individual investment you're making in some of the females on our staff too.
Well, thank you, Jack. That means a lot. I appreciate it. And it really, I think as a woman, we all know there's only so much we can say. I think the men who are in leadership and have the power and ability and influence to open doors for women is enormous. And I think our churches need all the leadership gifts God has given us at the table in order to lead in the kingdom in today's context. And so I'm passionate about our churches flourishing and being everything they can be. And I think God's given us the resources we need to do it, as long as we actually open the doors and welcome the people in that He's brought to us to help lead it.
That's amazing. Please keep it up. Please, yes.
Awesome. Well, Jack, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you, appreciate your friendship and your leadership. I really love your church and the people in it. So thank you for sharing all of your insight and wisdom, and just for your leadership in general in the kingdom. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Katie. Take care.
Thanks for joining us on the Together Project. Check out our free theological cheat sheet or grab a copy of my book, Developing Female Leaders, to learn more about the dynamics of how we can all do a better job creating church cultures where every leader can thrive. You can find those resources and more at KadiCole.com. Remember, the future is not just male or female. The future is together. See you next time.